Story 1. I am not sure whether this story will give too much away about who I am, but here goes. I am a graffiti artist, or as some might say, a troublemaker. Honestly, I do not care what people call me. The truth is, I love spray painting, and I am pretty good with a can in my hand. The graffiti scene, however, is a mess. People are territorial, unfriendly, and there is almost no respect among artists. Because of that, I have developed a habit of painting in places that are out of the way, spots where my work will not be seen by other artists or even the general public. Old train tracks are my go-to since they are often lined with abandoned trains just waiting to be decorated. My buddy Lucas likes to tag along when I go out, even though he is not really into graffiti himself. I appreciate his company. A lot of people do not understand how valuable it is to have a solid friend like that, and I think it is kind of sad. Most of my other friends either do not respect my hobbies or just do not care enough to stick around. Lucas, though, he gets it. One night, Lucas and I were hanging out at a random set of tracks I found earlier that day using Google Maps. We had smoked a bit. Not that I am a huge fan of weed, but Lucas smokes regularly, and I join in now and then to match his vibe. It was not even that late, probably just past 10 o'clock. We finished off a joint and talked as we strolled alongside an old freight train. What struck me as odd was that the train had no tags on it. Not a single one. It must have been brought here recently. The thought of having a blank canvas excited me. I tossed Lucas a can to mess around with, and I got to work. About 5 minutes in, I had my first tag done. I took a moment to admire it before moving on. Over the next 15 minutes, I managed to complete 3 tags, all lined up and looking sharp. I was pretty proud of how they turned out. Now, before anyone gets mad at me, I will admit that I usually toss my empty cans wherever they run dry. It is kind of satisfying to hear the little metal ball rattle inside as the can bounces away. So, I tossed my empties back down the tracks and caught up with Lucas, who had just finished rolling another joint and completely ignored the can of paint I gave him. For context, I do not smoke often because weed tends to give me bad anxiety. Honestly, I have a rough time with it most of the time, probably like 90% of the time. Looking back, smoking 2 joints while doing something illegal was not the smartest move. But I figured I would be fine. I was wrong. Right after we finished that second joint, we heard it, a muffled clang from somewhere behind us. Lucas and I froze, staring into the darkness. Sweat started forming on my neck as adrenaline hit me hard. I could not tell if the sound came from outside the train or inside one of the cars. Neither option felt good. We waited, barely breathing, for what felt like forever, but was probably just a minute. Nothing happened. So, I pulled out my phone and started recording a video. In the video, you can hear me panicking and saying stuff like, "What was that? Did you hear that?" Then, out of nowhere, something, or someone, picked up one of my empty cans and threw it toward us. It made a loud clattering sound before whoever it was started yelling and running in our direction. You cannot see much in the video, but I swear that is what happened. We bolted, but before we got far, the person yelled, "You better not trip, boy." And then, boom, a gunshot. I nearly dropped my phone right then and there, and poor Lucas almost fell flat on his face. I was so freaked out I stopped recording by accident. We ran faster than I think we ever had before. When we finally reached the road, we did not stop running until we were well away from the tracks. Neither of us said a word during the drive home. What could we even say? Call the cops? We were literally breaking the law, so that was not an option. But the story does not end there. A few weeks later, I decided to go back, this time during the day and with my Glock 17 tucked in my waistband. To my surprise, the train was still there. But something was different. The 3 spots where I had left my tags were covered in ugly red paint. Someone had deliberately ruined my work. I kept looking around and eventually found a car with its door wide open. I stepped inside and instantly felt uneasy. The car was empty except for a single chair in the middle, surrounded by chains and ropes scattered all over the floor. Some of the ropes were tied to the chair legs, while others just lay loose. But the worst part was the smell. The entire car reeked of bleach. It was so strong that if you closed your eyes, you might think you were in a janitor's closet. I pulled out my phone to snap a picture, but before I could, I heard another metallic clang from farther down the tracks. Maybe it was my imagination, but I was not sticking around to find out. I got out of there fast. I have told this story to so many people, and no one can explain it in a way that makes sense. I doubt a homeless person would have a gun, but I also cannot figure out why anyone else would be there acting like that. And what was with the red paint over my tags? The whole thing leaves me with more questions than answers. The most unsettling part, though, was that chair in the middle of the train car. I keep thinking about going back to take pictures, but I have not worked up the courage yet. I still do not know if whoever was out there that night was trying to kill us or just scare us off. But sometimes, when I am lying in bed and the world is quiet, I can still hear that gunshot echoing in my head. Story 2. As I write this, it is early July, but this story took place at the start of summer. Normally, I try to stick around my college town or travel to Europe during the summer months to avoid going back home. Unfortunately, that was not an option this time around. I ended up heading home, counting down the days until I would be on a plane to Germany. I was only supposed to be home for a week, but even that felt like too long. I was not really in the mood to see any old friends, but I also could not stand being stuck at home. So, I spent most of my time hiking, watching movies, or just driving around with no destination in mind. By my last day there, I was getting restless. I wanted to do something different, something that would get my blood pumping. Back in the day, my friends and I used to hop freight trains. It was one of those reckless habits I had left behind. But for some reason, that itch came back, and I decided to give it one last go. I drove out to a secluded stretch of tracks I knew about, where trains regularly passed through. The area was surrounded by thick trees and bushes, which made it feel hidden, perfect for avoiding attention. The last thing I needed was to get caught breaking the law after years of keeping clean. I parked my car and made my way to the tracks. To paint a picture, these tracks ran through the woods for a bit before cutting into a tunnel. On the other side of the tunnel was a tiny clearing, followed by a huge bridge stretching over a river. Back when my friends and I did this, we used to ride all the way across that bridge. But since I was alone, I had no way to get back to my car unless I wanted to walk 10 miles. So, my plan was simple: hop the train, ride it through the tunnel, then hop off and enjoy a peaceful walk back. It was around 2 or 3 in the afternoon when I started walking along the tracks, waiting for a train. After about 10 minutes, I felt that familiar vibration in the rails. I stepped off to the side, making sure to stay out of sight. As far as I know, most freight train conductors do not care enough to report someone walking near the tracks, but I did not want to take any chances. The train rolled past, and I waited until enough cars had gone by before stepping out. I picked a car that looked easy to climb and jogged alongside it, just like I had done dozens of times before. Once I felt ready, I grabbed the ladder and pulled myself up without any trouble. The train was not moving too fast, so it was an easy climb. As the train approached the tunnel, I noticed a strange flash of light up ahead. At first, I thought it might have been a spark from the train, but it looked different. The thought of an exposed wire crossed my mind, but it was too late to bail out. The train was picking up speed. The tunnel was perfectly straight, and as the adrenaline kicked in, I closed my eyes for a moment. That is when it happened. Out of nowhere, a hand shot out from the darkness and grabbed my leg. I nearly slipped, but my grip on the ladder held firm. I screamed and kicked out, but the train was moving too fast for me to see what had grabbed me. Before I could process what was happening, another hand slapped at my leg. I screamed again and scrambled up the ladder to get out of reach. My heart was pounding so hard I could barely think. As soon as the train exited the tunnel, I jumped off without hesitation. I stood there in the clearing, watching the train rumble away over the bridge. My mind was racing. Were there people in that tunnel? What were they doing there? And why the hell were they trying to pull me off the train? I paced back and forth, panicking. Then it hit me. The only way back to my car was through the tunnel. There was no way I was walking through it, especially knowing those people were still in there. They would see my silhouette against the light, while I would be blind in the dark. I sat down, trying to think of a plan. Walking across the bridge was too risky. A train could come along at any moment, and there was no room to avoid it. Calling someone for help crossed my mind, but what could they even do? Calling the police was out of the question. I was trespassing, plain and simple. I had no choice. I grabbed a rock and started walking toward the tunnel. My nerves were shot, and my grip on the rock was tight. I made it halfway through when I heard it, a faint clicking noise. It sounded like someone clicking their tongue, but it could have been mechanical. I froze. That was when I made a split-second decision. I pulled out my phone and shouted into the tunnel, "You better stay back, or I will shoot." My voice echoed through the tunnel, and the clicking stopped. I was bluffing, of course. I did not have a gun, but I needed them to believe I did. Then I cranked up my phone's volume and played a gunshot sound effect I found on YouTube. The echo made it deafening. I prayed it worked and sprinted through the tunnel as fast as I could, expecting an attack at any moment. By some miracle, no one tried to grab me. When I finally reached the other side, I turned to look back. That is when I saw it. Another flash of light, this time long enough for me to see two silhouettes standing on the tracks, staring in my direction. That was it. I was done. As I jogged away, I heard the most horrifying screech come from the tunnel. It was definitely human, but something about it felt completely unnatural. I have not hopped a train since that day, and I never plan to again. Story 3. The New York City subway system can be a downright terrifying place. I have been working as an employee for the Metropolitan Transportation Authority for 7 years now, and at this point, not much catches me off guard. But when friends or family ask me if I have any memorable stories, there is one experience that always comes to mind. One that still gives me chills because I cannot explain it. This incident occurred about 2 years into the job, but the memory is so vivid that it might as well have happened yesterday. By then, I had settled into the routine of my work and felt pretty comfortable with the ins and outs of the job. At the time, I was stationed in Brooklyn and was assigned to perform some routine maintenance work at High Street Station. The platform was completely deserted, and the eerie emptiness was something I never quite got used to. Subways are supposed to be busy, full of life and noise, but seeing one so quiet and lifeless was unsettling. I had been working for hours without spotting a single person, and the only sounds were the faint hum of the lights and the occasional rumble of a passing train. Then, out of nowhere, a loud metallic clang echoed from somewhere down the tracks. The sound startled me so much that I dropped the mop I was holding. It was an odd noise, the kind you might hear if a rock fell onto a metal rail. I froze, listening closely, but there was nothing else. I figured it had to be an animal, or maybe a loose piece of debris falling. These stations are old, after all. Convincing myself it was nothing serious, I resumed my work. About 10 minutes later, however, the same sound rang out again. Only this time, it was at least twice as loud. That is when I started to feel genuinely uneasy. Was it really possible for debris to fall twice in such a short span? It did not seem likely. Setting down my tools, I cautiously approached the entrance to the tunnel. I squinted into the darkness, but I could not make out anything. I debated calling out to see if anyone was there, but my gut told me to keep quiet. After a few moments, I decided to chalk it up to a fluke and try to focus back on my job. As I neared the end of my shift, just when I thought the weirdness was over, I heard something that made my skin crawl. A child's voice came from the tunnel, crying out for help. The desperation in the voice stopped me cold. Without hesitation, I ran to the edge of the platform and strained my ears. I hesitated, unsure what to do, but I could not ignore a child in distress. I climbed down onto the tracks and let my eyes adjust to the dimness. "Are you okay?" I called out. No response. That is when the voice rang out again, pleading for help. I shouted back, asking if they could hear me. "Yes," the child replied. "I am right in front of you. Just keep walking." My heart sank. Something about this felt very wrong. I asked the kid what was wrong, but there was a long pause before the voice simply repeated, "Just keep walking." As my eyes adjusted further, I could barely make out the shadow of what appeared to be a child standing just up the tracks. But then, something else caught my attention, another shadow. This one was much taller and clearly an adult. My blood turned to ice. I stood frozen, then turned around as slowly as I could and made my way back toward the platform. My instincts screamed at me to run, but I forced myself to stay calm and deliberate with my steps. I expected to be chased at any moment, but nothing happened. Just as I reached the platform, the child's voice called out again, "Wait, where are you going?" I did not stop. As soon as I was back on the platform, I bolted up the stairs and did not stop until I had cell service. I immediately called the police. Within minutes, officers flooded the station, and I stayed behind, anxiously waiting to hear what they found. After about 20 minutes of searching, they uncovered something chilling: a single child's shoe lying on the tracks. The officers theorized it might have been left behind during a struggle. Despite further searches and combing through missing persons databases, nothing else turned up. The prevailing theory was that whoever had been down there had escaped deeper into the tunnels and vanished. I still do not know what to make of it. The best explanation I have managed to come up with is this: some lunatic kidnapped a child and used him to bait a good Samaritan into a trap. Or maybe it was their own child, and they were raising him to be just as disturbed as they were. I cannot fathom any other scenario that makes sense. If my theory is correct, I can hardly imagine what that poor kid must have been going through. To this day, I have not set foot in that tunnel again, and I do not plan to. But sometimes, when I am alone at night, I can still hear that child's voice echoing in my head, calling for help.